I stood at the edge of the crowded banquet hall, my fingers laced so tightly they ached as if holding myself together might keep me from unraveling. The air buzzed with the clatter of silverware, the hum of voices and laughter that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. My sister's engagement party was in full swing, the kind of event that drew the whole town, everyone dressed in their Sunday best, their stories spilling over like the wine in their glasses. I wore a navy blue dress, the only one I owned that still passed for formal, though it was a relic from a funeral years ago. It hung looser now, the fabric brushing my skin like a memory I couldn't shake. They hadn't saved me a proper seat, not really. When I arrived, my cousin Laura flicked her wrist toward a flimsy folding chair, tucked beside the kitchen doors, where waiters darted in and out, their trays clanging. "Emma, you're fine there, right?" she said, her eyes already sliding past me. Her smile was thin, dismissive, like she was brushing away a speck of dust. I didn't respond. I never do. I lowered myself onto the chair, the metal biting into my thighs, and let the room carry on without me. My sister, glowing in a white dress that caught the light, drifted from table to table, her fiancé's hand resting lightly on her back. People leaned closer to catch her words, their faces alight with admiration or envy. I felt their glances when they passed me, brief pitying or simply absent. "Poor Emma," they'd murmur later, when the night softened their edges. "So quiet. No husband, no children. What does she even do with herself?" I let them talk. I let them weave their version of me, flimsy as gossip. But deep inside, where no one could reach, I carried a weight their words could never touch. It wasn't always this way. There was a time when my name held power, when it was spoken in hushed tones in rooms far more perilous than this one. But that life is gone buried so deep, I sometimes wonder if it was real. I sat there, the kitchen doors creaking behind me, the scent of roasted chicken and soap suds curling through the air. I folded my hands in my lap, my eyes tracing the speeches, the toasts, the bursts of laughter. My sister's fiancé stood, his voice carrying across the room as he thanked everyone for coming. My name didn't cross his lips, no one's did, and I told myself it was fine. I told myself I'd grown used to it, but it hurt. God, it hurt. Not the sharp kind of pain that demands tears, but the slow, heavy kind that lodges in your chest, a stone you carry until it feels like part of you. I looked down at my hands, at the faint scar snaking across my left knuckles, a pale thread from a night in Kabul I'll never speak of. I brushed my thumb over it, anchoring myself. I could leave, I thought. I could slip out into the night, vanish, and no one would notice. But I stayed. I always stay. Because somewhere beneath the weight, I still believe in showing up, even when no one sees you. I'm Emma Wilson, and this is my story. Not the one they tell the spinster, the shadow, the woman who blends into the walls. The real one. The one I've kept sealed away, bound by oaths and ghosts and promises to people who no longer walk this earth. I'm sharing it now because I need you to hear it, to understand what it's like to hold a truth no one would believe. If this strikes a chord, if you've ever felt unseen, please hit that subscribe button. Join me on this journey, because what happened next at a gala I nearly skipped changed everything. I don't know when I learned to fade away. Maybe it started in childhood here in this town, where my sister was the star singing in church, winning crowns at pageants while I was just there, the quiet one. The girl who read in corners and never made waves. My mother called me dependable, but it always sounded like she was apologizing for me. By 30, they'd stopped expecting anything. No family of my own, no career to boast about, over coffee at the diner. Just Emma in her small house at the town's edge, piecing together odd jobs, keeping to herself. They didn't know about the years I was away, the places I'd seen, the things I'd done. They never asked, and I never offered. That night at the engagement party, the sting of being invisible hit harder than usual. Laura leaned over at one point, her perfume sharp and cloying, and whispered, "Emma, try smiling more. It might make people notice you." I gave her a small nod, my lips twitching just enough to appease her, but inside I was screaming. Not at her, not exactly. At the years I'd let slip, by the silence I'd chosen, the way I'd let them define me. I wanted to stand, to speak, to make them see me. But I didn't. I never do. The party rolled on. The band struck up a lively tune. Couples spun across the dance floor. I sat by the kitchen doors, my chair teetering on the uneven tiles. I watched my sister twirl in her fiancé's arms, her laughter sharp and bright. I watched my mother glow from the head table, her eyes never once seeking mine. I watched Laura and her friends huddle, their whispers sharp, their glances flicking toward me, then away. And I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I didn't need their validation, their attention, their anything. But when a waiter, a young man with gentle eyes, paused to ask if I'd like water, I nearly broke. It was the first time all night someone had spoken to me like I was real. I thanked him, my voice even, and took the glass. My hands shook as I brought it to my lips. I closed my eyes for a moment, the cold water steadying me. I thought of a night years ago in a desert, half a world away, when thirst nearly broke me. I'd survived then. I'd survived this. I always did. But as I set the glass down, something stirred inside me. Not anger, not grief, but something fiercer, clearer. A quiet resolve. I didn't know it then, but that night was the start of something unraveling. Weeks later at a gala I almost didn't attend, the truth would spill out, not because I chose to tell it, but because someone else did. Someone who knew my name, my real name, and what it stood for. Someone who walked into a room full of people who thought they knew me and shattered their illusions. The engagement party wasn't the first time I'd been sidelined, but it cut deeper than most. Maybe because it was my sister's night, and I'd hoped foolishly for a moment of warmth. A glance, a word. Instead, I was an afterthought. A chair by the kitchen, a name left off the toast. I watched the room pulse with life, everyone so sure of their place in it. My sister's fiancé told a story about their first date, and the crowd laughed charmed. Laura's husband bragged about his new promotion, and heads nodded in approval. My mother raised her glass, her smile wide, as if she'd orchestrated the whole evening. And I sat there, the clatter of dishes behind me, wondering how I'd let it come to this. I wasn't always this person. There was a time when I walked with purpose, when my steps echoed in places most people will never see. I was someone who made decisions that changed lives, who carried secrets that could topple governments. But that was before the losses, the oaths, the choice to come back here and disappear. I chose this life, I reminded myself. I chose to let them think I was nothing, because it was safer, because it was easier, because the alternative, telling the truth, would mean opening wounds I wasn't sure I could close. But sitting there, the weight of their dismissal pressed harder than usual. I thought of the scar on my hand the night it was earned. I thought of the people I'd saved, the ones I couldn't. I thought of the code name they used to call me Sparrow, and how it felt like a ghost now hovering just out of reach. I wanted to stand, to walk to the center of the room, to let them see the woman I'd been, but I didn't. I sipped my water, I straightened my dress, I stayed. The night wore on. The speeches grew longer, the laughter louder. I watched it all, my face calm, my heart a quiet storm. When the young waiter passed by again, he offered a small smile, and I returned it, grateful for the gesture. It was enough to keep me there, to keep me from slipping out the door. Enough to remind me that even in the shadows I was still here. And then, as the band played its final notes and the crowd began to thin, I felt it again, that spark of resolve. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, like the first crack in a dam. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I felt it. A few weeks later, at a gala I attended out of obligation, the crack would split wide open. Not because I wanted it to, but because someone else, A man who knew my past, my power, my name would step into a room and make sure the world saw me. I woke the next morning with the weight of the engagement party still clinging to me, heavy as damp wool. My small house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. I made coffee, the old percolator, hissing on the stove, and stood by the kitchen window, staring at the gray dawn creeping over the backyard. The grass needed cutting. The fence sagged where a storm had hit last spring. I should fix it, I thought, but the thought slipped away as quickly as it came. My hands wrapped around the mug, the heat seeping into my palms, and for a moment I was somewhere else. Not here in this town, in this life. Somewhere sharper, colder, where the air smelled of dust and danger. I was 26, crouched in a safe house in Istanbul, my pulse steady despite the chaos outside. The city hummed with unrest, and I was waiting for a contact who might not show. My hair was cropped short, then dyed black my face, bare of anything that could mark me. I wore a leather jacket, not for style, but because it hid the knife strapped to my ribs. The room was dim-lit by a single bulb that flickered when the generator stuttered. I remember the weight of the dossier in my hands, the names and faces. I'd memorized the stakes so high I could feel them in my bones. Sparrow. My handler's voice crackled through the earpiece. "You're our best shot. Don't miss." I didn't. I never did. I blinked and the memory dissolved. I was back in my kitchen, the coffee gone lukewarm. My hands trembled slightly as I set the mug down. I hadn't thought of Istanbul in years. I'd trained myself not to. Those memories were locked away, sealed behind oaths I'd sworn to the agency to myself. But sometimes they slipped through like water through a cracked dam. A sound, a smell, a moment of stillness, and I was there again, young, fearless, someone who mattered. I moved through the day like I always did. I drove to the library where I worked part-time shelving books. The head librarian, Mrs. Carter, nodded as I walked in. Her smile polite but distant. "Morning, Emma," she said already, turning back to her computer. I didn't mind. The library was safe, predictable. I pushed the cart down the aisles, sliding books into place, the rhythm of it soothing. But as I worked, my mind drifted again. Not to Istanbul this time, but to a training camp in Virginia years before. I was 22, one of the youngest recruits, and the only woman in my cohort. The instructors didn't go easy on me. They couldn't afford to. I ran obstacle courses until my lungs burned. Learned to dismantle a rifle in the dark, studied languages until my head ached. I was good, better than good. By the end, they were calling me Sparrow, a name that stuck because I was small, quick, and impossible to catch. I paused, a book in my hand, and closed my eyes. I could still feel the weight of that first mission, the adrenaline of slipping across borders, the pride. When my handler said, "You saved lives today, Wilson," I'd been someone then. Someone who walked into rooms and felt the air shift. But that was before the losses piled up, before the faces of the ones I couldn't save started haunting me, before I came back here to this town to disappear. I opened my eyes, slid the book onto the shelf, and kept moving. The library was quiet, just a few patrons browsing, a young mother with a toddler, an old man reading the paper. No one looked at me twice. That was how I wanted it, I told myself. I'd chosen this. After my last mission, after the agency let me go, not fired, but retired with a handshake and a warning to stay silent, I came home. I told my family I'd been working overseas, something vague about nonprofits. They didn't press, they didn't care. To them, I was just Emma, who'd left for a while and come back quieter than before. But the silence was heavier than they knew. It wasn't just about keeping secrets. It was the loneliness of carrying a past no one could see. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit in my living room and stare at the small box hidden in my closet. Inside was a commendation, a medal I'd never wear, a photograph of me, with people I'd never name. I hadn't opened it in years, but I knew it was there, a tether to who I'd been. Sometimes I forgot I was ever anything but this forgotten. Overlooked the woman who shelved books, and nodded at neighbors who barely remembered her name. That afternoon, as I left the library, I stopped by the grocery store. The cashier, a girl barely out of high school, chatted about the engagement party. "Your sister looked like a movie star," she said, scanning my bread and milk. "Must be nice having a family like that." I smiled, murmured something vague, and took my bags. Outside the air was crisp, the sky heavy with clouds. I walked home, the plastic handles digging into my palms, and thought about her words. A family like that, if only she knew how little they saw me, how little they'd ever tried. When I got home, I put the groceries away and sat at the kitchen table. My hands found the scar on my knuckles again, tracing it absently. Another memory flickered, a night in Bogota. A deal gone wrong, a blade flashing in the dark. I'd gotten out, but not cleanly. The scar was my reminder, not of failure, but of survival. I'd survived then, and I was surviving now, even if it didn't feel like it. Even if every slight, every whispered "poor Emma" felt like a cut of its own. I thought about the gala coming up, a fundraiser for the local veterans group. My mother had insisted I go, said it would look good for the family. I didn't want to. The thought of another room full of people who didn't see me made my chest tighten. But I'd go. I always did. I'd wear the navy dress again, sit where they told me, and keep my silence. Because that's who I was now. Not Sparrow, not the woman who'd slipped through shadows and changed the world. Just Emma Wilson, who showed up and disappeared. But something was shifting. I felt it in the quiet moments, like the one in the kitchen, the night before when I'd set down the glass of water and felt that spark of resolve. It was small, but it was there. I didn't know what it meant, didn't know it would lead me to a night where my past would come crashing into my present. A night where a man I hadn't seen in years would walk into a room and say my name, not Emma but Sparrow, and make everyone who'd ever dismissed me freeze. I stood, rinsed my mug, and went to bed. That night I dreamed of a desert, of a voice, calling my codename, of a mission I'd never finished. When I woke, my heart was racing, and for the first time in years, I didn't push the memory away. I let it sit there heavy and real, a piece of me I'd tried to forget. I didn't know it then, but I was starting to remember who I was. And soon the world would remember too. The days after the engagement party blurred into each other, each one folding into the next, like pages in a book I didn't want to read. I moved through my routine with the same quiet precision I'd once used to check a safe house for bugs, or memorize a target's habits. Wake up, coffee, library, groceries, home. The town went on around me loud with its small dramas, gossip about who was getting married, who was moving away, who'd bought a new car. I listened when people spoke to me, nodded at the right moments, but I was never really part of it. I was the woman they passed by, the one they smiled at out of habit, not recognition. Emma Wilson, who lived alone, who worked odd jobs, who was always there but never noticed. At the library, I shelved books with a rhythm that kept my hands busy and my mind still. Mrs. Carter, the head librarian, would sometimes ask me to cover the front desk, and I'd sit there scanning returns, answering questions with as few words as possible. People were kind enough, but their kindness had an edge, a pity that stung worse than indifference. "You're so good at this, Emma," a regular once said, an older woman with a stack of romance novels. "It's nice you have something to keep you busy." I smiled, murmured thanks, but her words lingered like a bruise. Busy, as if my life was a hobby, a way to fill the empty hours of a woman who'd never made anything of herself. I let them think that. I'd learned long ago that it was easier to let people write their own stories about you than to try to correct them. My sister Claire was the one they admired, the beauty, the bride-to-be, the one who'd always known how to shine. At family dinners, when I bothered to go, she'd hold court, her voice bright, her stories polished. My mother would beam, my cousins would laugh, and I'd sit at the far end of the table, my plate barely touched, listening to Claire talk about her wedding plans or her fiancé's latest promotion. No one asked about me. If they did, it was a quick "Emma, how's the library?" before moving on. I'd answer softly and they'd nod already, turning away. But it wasn't just family. The town had its own way of boxing me in. At the diner where I sometimes ate lunch, the waitresses called me Han and refilled my coffee without asking, but their chatter was for the regulars, the farmers, the teachers, the young mothers. I was just the woman in the corner booth, reading a book, leaving a tip slipping out. At church on the rare Sundays I went, people shook my hand and said, "Good to see you, Emma," but their eyes were already on the next person. I was a spinster to them, a word they didn't say aloud, but carried in their glances. A nobody, a burden maybe, to a family that didn't know what to do with me. I endured it. Not because I was weak, but because I'd learned to carry heavier things than their dismissal. I'd carried the weight of secrets that could unravel nations, of choices that left blood on my hands, of losses that still woke me in the dark. This, their pity, their whispers, was nothing compared to that. So I kept my head down, my voice, soft, my scars hidden. I smiled when Laura, my cousin, teased me about my quiet little life at the grocery store. I nodded when my mother suggested I get out more, as she handed me an invitation to the Veterans Gala. I said nothing when Claire's friends at a coffee shop I'd stopped into giggled about how I must knit all day to pass the time. But God, it wore on me. Not the big moments, but the small ones. The way Laura's husband at a family barbecue boasted about his new law firm job while I cleared plates unnoticed. The way my mother over tea sighed and said, "Claire's so busy, but you've got time, Emma, don't you?" The way the town's younger women, with their bright careers and brighter futures, spoke over me at community meetings, their voices sharp with confidence. I wanted to tell them I'd been them once, sharper, braver, walking into rooms where lives hung in the balance. But I didn't. I couldn't. The oaths I'd sworn to the agency were ironclad, and the woman I'd been Sparrow was a ghost I'd buried. Still, I tried to be kind. When a neighbor's car broke down, I drove her to the doctor. When Mrs. Carter's grandson needed help with a history project, I spent hours at the library pulling books, explaining the Cold War in ways he could understand. When Claire asked me to help address her wedding invitations, I sat at her kitchen table, my handwriting neat, my silence steady. I didn't do it for their gratitude. I'd learned not to expect it. I did it because kindness was the one piece of myself I could still give, the one thing they couldn't take. But kindness didn't shield me from the sting. One evening at a town hall meeting, I overheard two women whispering near the coffee table. "Emma Wilson's always here, isn't she? Just sitting there, no family, no life." It's sad. I froze my cup halfway to my lips. They didn't see me, didn't know I was close enough to hear. I set the cup down, my hands steady, and walked out. In my car, I sat for a long time, staring at the dashboard, my breath shallow. Sad. The word echoed sharp as a blade. I wasn't sad. I was tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of carrying a past no one could see. Tired of pretending it didn't hurt. I drove home, the radio off the night, pressing against the windows. In my living room, I sat in the dark, my hands resting on my knees. I thought about the box in my closet, the metal, the commendation, the photograph. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew what it held, proof of a life I'd lived, a woman I'd been. A woman who'd stood in rooms where generals listened, where presidents nodded, where the fate of strangers rested on her word. Sparrow. The name felt foreign now, like a song I'd forgotten the words to. The gala was a week away. I didn't want to go. I'd already decided to wear the navy dress again, to sit where they put me, to endure another night of being overlooked. But something was different now. The spark I'd felt at the engagement party, that quiet resolve, hadn't faded. It was small, but it was growing like a flame I hadn't noticed until it started to warm me. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know it would lead me to a moment where my silence would break, not by my choice, but by someone else's. Someone who knew my name, my code name, my truth. Someone who would walk into that gala and make the world see me, not as Emma Wilson, the nobody, but as Sparrow, the woman they owed everything. I stood turned on the light and went to bed. That night, I dreamed of a mission in Berlin, of a voice in my earpiece, saying, "Sparrow, you're clear." When I woke, my heart was steady, and for the first time in years, I didn't push the dream away. I let it linger, a reminder of who I'd been, and maybe, just maybe, who I still was. The invitation to the Veterans Gala sat on my kitchen table for days, its cream cardstock and gold lettering glaring at me every time I passed. My mother had dropped it off with a quick, "You should go, Emma. It's important for the family." She didn't explain why, and I didn't ask. I knew what she meant. Claire would be there radiant as always, and my presence would make the Wilsons look united, supportive, whole. I didn't want to go. The thought of another night in a room full of people who barely saw me made my stomach twist. But I'd go. I always did. I told myself it was just a few hours, a few polite nods, a few hours of blending into the background. I didn't know it would be the night everything changed. The gala was held at the town's only hotel, a brick building with chandeliers that tried too hard to be grand. I stood in my bedroom that evening, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The navy dress hung on me, familiar but wrong, like a costume I'd outgrown. I smoothed it down, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, and ignored the ache in my chest. I didn't wear makeup, never had, not even in the field, where a bare face was just another way to disappear. My hands lingered on the scar across my knuckles, the faint white line catching the light. For a moment, I was back in Kabul, the air thick with smoke, my heart steady despite the chaos. I blinked, and the memory faded. I grabbed my purse and left. The hotel ballroom was already crowded when I arrived. Men in suits, women in glittering dresses, the hum of conversation punctuated by laughter. I hesitated at the entrance, my fingers tightening on the strap of my purse. The air smelled of perfume and polished wood, and for a second I was in another room, years ago, a briefing in Langley. The stakes so high I could taste them. I shook it off and stepped inside. A young woman at the check-in table smiled, checked my name off a list, and handed me a program. "Enjoy the evening, Ms. Wilson," she said, her eyes already on the next guest. I scanned the room. Claire was near the center, her laugh bright, her fiancé at her side. My mother stood with a group of women, her posture perfect, her smile practiced. Laura was there too, her dress a bold red, her voice carrying, as she told a story that made her friends giggle. I didn't see a place for me, not really. I drifted toward the edge of the room where a few extra chairs were set up near the service doors. A waiter passed by, balancing a tray of champagne flutes, and I caught the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen beyond. It was familiar, this spot, the place they always left for me. I sat the chair creaking under me and folded my hands in my lap. The program listed speeches, awards, a silent auction, all to raise money for the Veterans Group. I recognized a few names, local business owners, a retired colonel who lived on the outskirts of town. I wondered if he'd ever been agency, if he'd know the weight of a code name. I doubted it. He was the kind who wore his service like a badge. Mine was a secret I'd sworn to keep. The evening began with a speech from the mayor, his voice booming about community and sacrifice. People clapped their faces earnest. I watched my expression neutral, my thoughts drifting. I thought of missions where sacrifice wasn't a word, but a reality, blood on the ground. A colleague's empty chair, a choice that left you hollow. I thought of Sparrow, the woman I'd been, who'd walked away from it all, to come back here. For what? To sit by the kitchen doors, to be poor Emma, to let the world forget her. Claire took the stage next, her voice clear and warm. She spoke about her fiancé's work with the Veterans Group, about how proud she was to be part of this night. The crowd loved her, their applause loud and long. I clapped too, my hands moving automatically. She didn't look my way. Neither did my mother, who stood near the front, her eyes fixed on Claire. Laura caught my eye at one point, her lips curving in a smile that wasn't quite kind. "You're here," she mouthed, as if surprised I'd bothered to show. I nodded, my face blank, and turned my attention back to the stage. The speeches went on. A retired sergeant spoke about his time in Iraq, his voice rough with emotion. A young widow shared her husband's story, her hands trembling as she held the microphone. I listened, my chest tight. I knew their kind of loss, though mine was different, nameless, classified, buried in reports no one would ever read. I wanted to stand to tell them I understood, but I stayed still. I always did. Then came the moment that made my breath catch. Laura's husband, Tom, took the stage. He was presenting an award, his suit crisp, his smile wide. He talked about courage, about heroes, about the men and women who served. His words were polished, but they grated on me. Not because they were wrong, but because they were easy. He'd never served, never faced a choice that cost him sleep. He glanced at Laura as he spoke, and she beamed her friends, whispering approvingly. Then he said something that made my hands clench. We all know someone who's given back, who's made a difference. But tonight, let's honor the ones who really stood out. The crowd nodded, but I felt the sting. The ones who really stood out. Not people like me who'd done their work in the shadows, who'd come home to nothing but silence. I looked down at my hands, the scar pale against my skin. I thought of a night in Bogota, a deal gone wrong, the blade that left that mark. I'd saved 3 agents that night, but no one in this room would ever know. No one cared. The award was given, the applause rose, and I sat there, the service doors swinging behind me. A waiter paused, offered me a glass of water. I took it, my voice soft as I thanked him. The cold glass grounded me, but the ache in my chest didn't fade. I was tired of being unseen, tired of carrying a past no one could imagine. Tired of pretending it didn't hurt. I almost left then. I could slip out, disappear into the night, and no one would notice. But I stayed. Something held me there, that spark of resolve. I'd felt weeks ago now, a steady glow. I didn't know what was coming. I didn't know the room was about to change, that a man I hadn't seen in years was about to walk through those doors and turn my world upside down. I didn't know I was moments away from being seen, not as Emma Wilson, the nobody, but as Sparrow, the woman who'd changed everything. I sat there, the gala humming around me, the weight of my silence heavier than ever. And then the doors opened and everything shifted. The gala hummed along, a rhythm of clinking glasses and murmured conversations. The kind of noise that wraps a room in warmth but leaves you cold if you're on the outside. I sat by the service doors, my water glass sweating in my hand, the program crumpled in my lap. The speeches had slowed, and people were mingling now, their voices rising as the wine flowed. Claire was at the center of it all, her laughter bright, her fiancé's arm around her. My mother stood nearby, her smile fixed, nodding at something a councilman said. Laura and her friends clustered at a table, their dresses catching the light, their whispers sharp with gossip. I watched it all, my face calm, my heart a quiet ache. I was used to this, the edge of the room, the half-glances, the space where I existed but didn't belong. Then the main doors opened. Not the service doors behind me, but the grand ones at the far end, carved wood and brass, that creaked with importance. A hush rippled through the crowd, soft at first, then spreading like a wave. Heads turned, conversations faltered. I didn't look up right away. I assumed it was another local dignitary, maybe the colonel who'd spoken earlier, making a late entrance. But the silence deepened, and something in the air shifted a weight, a presence the kind I hadn't felt since my agency days when a room changed because someone dangerous walked in. I lifted my eyes. A man stood in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, his suit, impeccable but unflashy, the kind that costs more than most people's cars. His hair was silver, his face lined but sharp eyes, scanning the room with a precision I recognized. I knew him, not from this town, not from this life, but from before, from Langley, from briefings where lives hung on a word. He was Director William Hayes, head of the CIA, a man whose name was whispered in corridors of power and fear. My breath caught, my fingers tightening on the glass. What was he doing here? This was a small-town gala, a fundraiser, not a place for someone like him. The room was still every eye on him. The mayor hurried forward, his hand outstretched, but Hayes barely acknowledged him. He said something low, his voice too soft to carry, and the mayor nodded, stepping back. Hayes's gaze swept the crowd again, deliberate searching. I sank lower in my chair, an old instinct kicking in. Stay, small stay, unseen. I didn't know why he was here, but I knew it couldn't be for me. I'd been out for years, my file sealed, my codename retired. Sparrow was a ghost, and I was just Emma Wilson, the woman by the kitchen doors. But then his eyes found me. They locked unsteady and sure, and my heart stopped. He started moving. His steps measured, cutting through the crowd like a blade. People parted for him, their whispers trailing in his wake. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My mind raced. Had I been compromised? Was there a threat I'd missed? But his face wasn't tense, wasn't warning. It was something else, something I couldn't read. He stopped a few feet from me, the room so quiet I could hear the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen behind me. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low but clear, carrying the weight of authority. "We've been looking for you." The words hit like a shockwave. My glass slipped in my hand, but I caught it, setting it on the table with a soft clink. Every eye in the room was on us now. Claire, my mother, Laura, the mayor, the waiters, the strangers. I felt their stares heavy and confused, but I kept my eyes on Hayes. "Sir," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest, "I think you have the wrong person." He smiled, just a flicker, the kind of smile that said he knew more than I wanted him to. "No, ma'am," he said, "I don't." The crowd murmured a low buzz of curiosity and disbelief. Laura leaned forward, her brow furrowed. Claire's fiancé whispered something to her, and she shook her head confused. My mother's smile faltered, her eyes darting between me and Hayes. I wanted to disappear, to slip through the service doors and vanish into the night, but I couldn't, not with him standing there, not with the weight of his words pinning me in place. He took a step closer, his voice dropping, but still clear enough for the room to hear. "Emma Wilson," he said, and my name sounded different in his mouth, stronger, heavier, like it meant something. Or should I say, Sparrow? The room froze. My heart slammed against my ribs, and for a moment I was back in the field, the air thick with danger, my pulse steady despite the stakes. Sparrow, my code name, the one I'd buried. The one I'd sworn never to speak. How did he know? Why was he saying it here now in front of everyone? I opened my mouth to protest, to deflect, but he raised a hand, gentle but firm, and I fell silent. "I'm sorry to interrupt your evening," he said, addressing the crowd. Now though his eyes stayed on me, "but there's something you all need to know about this woman. Something we owe her for." The murmurs grew louder, a mix of confusion and curiosity. Laura's mouth was open, her red dress suddenly too bright against her pale face. Claire's hands were clenched, her fiancé's arms stiff around her. My mother stared at me, her expression unreadable. I wanted to run, to scream, to tell Hayes to stop, but I didn't. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, my scar burning under my thumb. Because deep down beneath the fear, I felt it, that spark of resolve, now a flame roaring to life. Hayes turned back to me, his voice softening, but every word carried. "You've been quiet for a long time, Sparrow. Too long, but we haven't forgotten. And tonight we're here to make sure no one else does either." I couldn't speak. My throat was tight, my eyes stinging. The room was a blur of faces, all watching, all waiting. I didn't know what he was about to say, but I knew it would change everything. I knew the life I'd built, the silence, the invisibility was about to shatter. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure I wanted to stop it. The air in the ballroom felt too thick, like I was breathing through a veil. Director Hayes stood before me, his presence a quiet command, his eyes holding mine with a weight I hadn't felt in years. The crowd was silent, their gazes pressing against me, sharp with confusion, and something else, curiosity maybe, or disbelief. My hands rested in my lap, but my thumb traced the scar, on my knuckles grounding me. Sparrow. He'd said it aloud, my code name, the piece of me I'd buried so deep I thought it was gone. And now it was here in this room with my sister, my mother Laura, and half the town staring like I was a stranger. Emma Wilson Hayes said again, his voice steady reverent. Known to us as Sparrow is one of the most extraordinary operatives the agency has ever seen. The words landed like a detonation, soft but shattering. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, a low hum of shock. I didn't look at them. I couldn't. My eyes stayed on Hayes, searching for a reason, a motive, anything to explain why he was doing this now, after all these years. He took a step closer, his tone unwavering. For over a decade, she served this country in ways most of you will never fully understand. Missions so critical, so dangerous they're still classified. Lives saved, threats stopped, all because of her courage, her skill, her sacrifice. He paused, letting the words settle, and I felt the room shift, eyes widening, postures, straightening, whispers fading. We owe her everything. My throat tightened. I wanted to stop him, to say it wasn't true, to push it all back into the shadows where it belonged. But I couldn't move. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with something fiercer, recognition maybe, or the ache of being seen after so long. I glanced at the crowd for the first time. Claire's face was pale, her hands gripping her fiancé's arm. Laura's mouth hung open, her red dress, a stark contrast to her ashen skin. My mother stood frozen, her eyes locked on me, her expression a mix of confusion and something I couldn't name, regret perhaps, or shame. Hayes didn't stop. In 2012, he said a terrorist cell in Istanbul was planning an attack that would have killed thousands. Sparrow went in alone, unarmed, and dismantled their network from the inside. She saved lives that day, American lives, Allied lives, civilian lives, and she did it without a single shot fired. He looked at me, his eyes softening. You never got the recognition you deserved for that. Not publicly, not until now. The memory hit me like a wave. Istanbul, the safe house, the flickering bulb, the dossier in my hands. I was 26, my codename still new, my heart steady despite the stakes. I'd slipped into the city, like a shadow met contacts in back alleys, pieced together, a plot no one else saw coming. I'd walked out with blood on my hands, not theirs but mine, from a fall I didn't have time to tend. The mission was a success, but I'd never heard about it again. It was sealed like all my work, like me. I blinked back in the ballroom, my hands trembling now. Hayes was still speaking. And in 2015 in Bogota, when a deal with a cartel went south, Sparrow saved 3 of our agents. She took a knife to the hand, he nodded at my scar, and I flinched and still got them out. Those agents are alive today because of her. Their families are whole because of her. The crowd was silent now, not even a whisper. I could feel their eyes on my hand, on the scar I'd hidden for years. I wanted to curl my fingers to hide it, but I didn't. I let them see, let them wonder. Hayes's voice softened, but it carried. She never asked for medals, never asked for praise. She did her job, and when it was over, she came home. She chose silence, not because she had to, but because she believed it was right. I shook my head just slightly, my voice barely a whisper. Sir, please? It was all I could manage. I didn't want this, not the attention, not the truth laid bare. I'd spent years building a life where no one knew where I was, just Emma, the quiet one, the nobody. But Hayes didn't stop. He crouched slightly, his eyes level with mine, and for a moment it was just us. Like we were back in Langley debriefing after a mission. You don't get to hide anymore, Sparrow, he said, his voice low but firm. Not from us, not from them. He straightened, turning to the crowd. This woman is a hero, and it's time you all knew it. The room erupted, not in applause, not yet, but in a swell of sound gasps and murmurs and chairs shifting. I saw Claire's fiancé lean toward her, whispering frantically. Laura's friends stared, their hands covering their mouths. My mother took a step forward, then stopped, her face unreadable. I wanted to stand, to run, to disappear, but my legs wouldn't move. My chest was tight, my eyes burning, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of Sparrow not as a ghost, but as me. A memory flashed unbidden. Bogota, 2015. The alley was dark, the air thick with the smell of diesel and fear. The deal had gone wrong, bad intel, a double cross. The cartel's man lunged, his knife flashing. I blocked it with my hand, the blade slicing deep, but I didn't stop. I got the agents out, dragging one who couldn't walk my blood, mixing with the dirt. Later in the safe house, my handler stitched me up, his hands steady. "You're a damn miracle, Sparrow," he said. I didn't feel like one. I felt like a machine, doing what I was trained to do. But now in this ballroom, with Hayes's words ringing, I felt it, the pride, the pain, the cost. Hayes stepped back, his hands clasped behind him, and the room seemed to hold its breath. I looked at him, my voice barely audible. Why now, I asked the question. Slipping out before I could stop it, he smiled, small and sad. "Because you deserve it," he said, "and because we owe you." He turned to the crowd again, his voice rising. "This gala is for veterans, for heroes, and there is no one here more deserving of that title than Emma Wilson, Sparrow. Our debt to her can never be repaid, but tonight we start." The applause came then slow at first, then building a wave that crashed over me. I didn't want it. I didn't know what to do with it. I sat there, my hands still in my lap, my scar exposed, my heart racing. The room was a blur of faces. Claire, Laura, my mother, strangers all watching me, seeing me not as the spinster, the nobody, but as something else, something real. I closed my eyes for a moment, and I was back in Bogota, the agent safe, my hand bleeding, my handler's voice in my ear. "You did it, Sparrow. You're clear." I'd been clear then. I wasn't now. I was exposed raw, the truth laid bare for everyone to see. And yet, beneath the fear, beneath the ache, I felt it, that flame of resolve, now a fire burning bright. The applause rolled over me, a tide I couldn't escape. It filled the ballroom loud and unrelenting, but I barely heard it. My hands stayed in my lap, my thumb pressed against the scar on my knuckles, anchoring me to something real. Director Hayes stood a few steps away, his posture straight, his eyes still on me, a quiet nod of respect in his gaze. The room was alive with movement now, people, standing, turning toward me, their faces a mix of awe, confusion, and something heavier, something like guilt. I didn't want to look at them, didn't want to see the shift in their eyes, but I couldn't help it. Their stares pulled me in, and for the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. Claire was on her feet, her white dress catching the light, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her fiancé stood beside her, his arm no longer around her, his mouth set in a line. Laura was frozen at her table, her red dress stark against her pale face, her friends whispering frantically around her. My mother was closer now, a few steps from the stage, her eyes wide, her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. The mayor, the councilman, the retired colonel. They all watched me, their applause slowing their expressions, shifting from polite enthusiasm to something deeper, something real. I didn't know what to do. I'd spent so long hiding, so long being Emma Wilson, the quiet one, the nobody, that this reverence, this recognition felt like a language I'd forgotten. My chest was tight, my throat burning, and I wanted to stand, to slip through the service doors behind me, to disappear into the night. But I couldn't. Not with Hayes there, not with the weight of his words still ringing, not with the room holding its breath, waiting for me to move, to speak, to be Sparrow. Hayes raised a hand, and the applause quieted the crowd, settling into an expectant hush. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box, the kind that holds medals or memories. My heart stopped. I knew what it was before he opened it. A commendation, one I'd been told about years ago, but never received, never expected to. He stepped forward, his voice low but clear, meant for me, but carrying to every corner of the room. "This is long overdue," he said. "For your service, for your sacrifice for everything you've given." He opened the box, and the light caught the metal inside a star, simple but heavy with meaning. The crowd murmured a soft wave of awe. I shook my head, my voice barely a whisper. "Sir, I couldn't finish." He crouched slightly, his eyes level with mine, and for a moment it was just us. Like we were back in a briefing room, the world outside fading away. "You earned this, Sparrow," he said, his voice soft but firm. "And you don't get to say no." He straightened, holding the box out, and I took it. My hands trembling. The velvet was cool against my fingers, the weight of the metal grounding me. I didn't look at it. I couldn't. I kept my eyes on Hayes, on the man who'd just torn my silence apart and given me back a piece of myself I thought I'd lost. He stepped back, and the crowd rose again, their applause louder, now more certain. I felt it like a current pulling me under, but I didn't fight it. I let it wash over me, let it carry the years of loneliness, the weight of being unseen. I looked out at the room, at the faces I'd known my whole life, and saw them differently now, not as family, not as neighbors, but as strangers who'd never really known me. And I realized in that moment that I didn't need them to. Not anymore. Then Laura moved. She stood her chair, scraping against the floor, and walked toward me. Her steps hesitant, her face flushed. The crowd quieted, watching her, and I felt a flicker of dread. She stopped a few feet away, her hands twisting together, her eyes darting between me and the metal in my hands. "Emma," she said, her voice shaking. I didn't know. I'm so sorry." The words hung there fragile and raw. I looked at her, at the cousin who'd dismissed me, who'd whispered "poor Emma," and laughed behind my back. I saw the regret in her eyes, the shame, but it didn't soothe the ache in my chest. It didn't erase the years of slights, the folding chairs by the kitchen, the smiles that weren't kind. I wanted to say something sharp to let the hurt spill out, but I didn't. I'd learned long ago that words don't heal wounds, they just make them bleed louder. "It's fine," I said, my voice soft but steady. It wasn't fine, but I didn't need her to know that. My silence said enough. She nodded, her eyes dropping, and stepped back, her red dress blending into the crowd. I felt the room's attention shift, their gazes softer now, heavier with something like respect. But I didn't want their apologies, their pity turned to praise. I wanted the quiet. I'd lost the life I'd built, even if it was small, even if it was lonely. Claire came next, her steps slower, her face pale. She stopped beside me, her hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles were white. "Emma," she whispered, and I heard the crack in her voice, the weight of years we'd never bridged. "Why didn't you tell us?" Her eyes searched mine, pleading, but I didn't have an answer. I hadn't told them because they'd never asked, because they'd never seen me, because the truth was a burden I'd carried alone. I looked at her, my sister, the golden child, and felt a pang, not anger, not sadness, but something softer, something like grief. "I couldn't," I said, my voice barely audible. It was the truth, and it was enough. She nodded, her eyes glistening, and stepped back, her fiancé pulling her close. My mother didn't come forward. She stood where she was, her face unreadable, her hands clasped at her waist. I met her gaze for a moment, and I saw it, the flicker of regret, the realization of how little she'd known me. But she didn't move, and I didn't expect her to. Hayes raised a hand again, and the room stilled. He turned to me, his voice formal now, a soldier's cadence. "On behalf of the agency and this country, we salute you, Sparrow." He brought his hand to his brow, a crisp salute, and the room followed, men and women, veterans and civilians, their hands rising in a gesture that felt sacred, heavy with meaning. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I sat there, the metal in my hands, the weight of their respect pressing against me, and felt the fire inside me burn brighter, steadier. The applause came again, softer now, and the gala moved on. Hayes stepped away, shaking hands with the mayor, but his eyes found mine one last time. A silent promise that this wasn't the end. The crowd dispersed, some approaching me, their voices low, their words stumbling. Thank you, we had no idea, you're incredible. I nodded, murmured thanks, but my heart was elsewhere caught, in the moment when my codename had filled the room, when I'd been Sparrow again, if only for a night. I looked down at the medal, its star glinting in the light. I didn't need it, I'd never needed it. But holding it, feeling its weight, I understood what Hayes had done. He hadn't just given me recognition, he'd given me back myself. The gala faded into a blur of soft lights and murmured voices, the kind of haze that settles after a storm. I sat for a while longer, the velvet box in my hands. The medal's weight a quiet anchor. People moved around me, some stealing glances, others offering tentative smiles. But the space around my chair felt sacred, untouched. Director Hayes had left slipping out with the same understated authority. He'd entered his final nod to me, a promise I didn't yet understand. The crowd thinned, the clatter of dishes growing louder as the waitstaff cleared tables. I knew I should leave, but my legs felt heavy. My heart caught in the strange, fragile peace of being seen. I stood at last, the navy dress brushing my knees, the box tucked under my arm. Claire approached as I moved toward the door, her face softer now, her eyes red-rimmed. "Emma," she said, her voice low. "Can we talk later, I mean? Please." I looked at her, my sister, the woman I'd loved and envied and never truly known. I wanted to say yes to bridge the years between us, but the words didn't come. Not yet. Maybe I said my voice, gentle but firm. She nodded, stepping back, and I felt a pang, not of anger, but of hope, small and tentative, like a seed I might one day tend. My mother was waiting by the entrance, her coat draped over her arm, her posture stiff. She didn't speak at first, just looked at me, her eyes searching for something I wasn't sure I could give. "Emma," she said finally. Her voice tight, I didn't know. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was close. I nodded, my lips pressed together. "I know," I said, and left it at that. I walked past her, out into the cool night air, the hotel's lights fading behind me. I didn't look back. The drive home was quiet, the radio off, the hum of the engine, my only company. The town slept, its streets empty, its houses dark. I pulled into my driveway, the familiar sag of the fence, greeting me like an old friend. Inside my house was still the kind of stillness that holds you without judgment. I set the velvet box on the kitchen table next to the coffee mug I hadn't washed that morning. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The medal wasn't the point. It was what it meant, the truth, the recognition, the reclamation of a name I'd thought I'd lost. Sparrow. I sat in the dark, my hands resting on the table, and let the night settle around me. I thought of the gala, of Hayes's voice, of the room's silence when he said my code name. I thought of Laura's apology, Claire's plea, my mother's faltering gaze. I thought of the years I'd spent hiding, letting the world write me off as poor Emma the spinster, the nobody. I'd chosen that life, I reminded myself. I'd chosen silence, not because I was weak, but because I'd carried enough. But now, with the truth laid bare, I felt lighter, like I'd set down a stone I hadn't realized was crushing me. The next morning, I went back to my routine. Coffee, library, groceries. But something had changed. Not the town, it was the same, with its gossip and small dramas, but me. I walked a little straighter, my steps a little surer. Mrs. Carter at the library smiled when I arrived. Her usual politeness tinged with something new, something like respect. "Heard about the gala," she said, her voice careful. "That was something, Emma." I nodded, shelving a book, and didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. The truth was out there now, a quiet ripple spreading through the town, and I didn't have to explain it to anyone. At the diner, the waitresses were bolder. "Is it true," one asked, refilling my coffee, "you were some kind of spy?" Her eyes were wide, eager, but not unkind. I smiled just a flicker and said, "Something like that." She laughed, shaking her head, and left me to my book. I didn't mind the questions. They weren't pity anymore, weren't dismissal. They were curiosity, maybe even admiration, and I found I could bear it. Claire called that afternoon, her voice hesitant. "Can I come over?" she asked. I said yes, and when she arrived, we sat at my kitchen table, the velvet box between us. She didn't ask about it, didn't push. She just talked about her wedding, her fears, her life. And for the first time, I listened without the weight of being unseen. When she asked about my past, I told her a little, just enough. Not the missions, not the blood, but the feeling of being someone who mattered. She listened, her eyes wet, and when she left, she hugged me, her arms tight. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. I didn't say anything, but I held her a moment longer. My mother didn't call, didn't visit. I saw her at church a week later, her nod brief, her smile strained. I didn't push. Some distances can't be crossed. Not yet, maybe not ever. Laura sent a card, a short note of apology, and I tucked it away unanswered. I didn't need their regret. I'd carried my own for too long. I'm Emma Wilson, and this is where my story ends, not with triumph, but with peace. I'm still the woman who shelves books, who lives in a small house at the edge of town, who keeps to herself. But I'm also Sparrow, and I don't hide her anymore. She lives in my spine, in the way I hold my head, in the quiet strength I carry. I don't need the world's applause, don't need their approval. I know who I am, and that's enough. To you watching this, I want to say something. You don't need to explain your past to anyone. You don't need to prove your worth to people who never saw it. Your truth lives in you, in the scars you carry. The choices you've made, the strength you've built in silence. Hold it close, let it be yours. And when the moment comes to stand in your light, don't shrink from it. You are enough just as you are. I walked to my closet that night, pulled out the small box I'd hidden for years. Inside was the commendation, the photograph, the life I'd left behind. I added the new medal, closed the box, and put it back. Then I went outside, the air cool against my skin, and stood in my backyard. The stars were bright, the town quiet. I folded my hands, not in restraint, but in gratitude, and let the night hold me. I was home, not just in this house, but in myself. And for the first time in years, I was whole.